Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you guys are new. I'm so excited for today's video because this is my favorite video to film ever. I love this one. So I started this video last year where I posted a video talking about my eyeshadow palette ranking, but it's actually based on usages. So it's not just like what I'm feeling like that day that I like the best or don't. This is actually how many times I've used every single palette in my collection all throughout the year. I'm even including the palettes that I have since decluttered, and they're probably going to be lower towards the list as a spoiler, just because if I didn't like them, I probably wasn't reaching for them so much. So in this video, we are going to just rank every single palette in my collection and the ones I owned earlier this year based on the actual amount of times that I used them. So throughout the year, every single day, I write down which palette I used that day. If I've created a look that involves multiple palettes, I will include those. I will put more than one palette per day if that's what I used. So I don't limit it to just one palette, I just mark down what I've used. And then same thing, if I were to have a makeup look during the day that I wear throughout the day to work or whatever, and then I'm taking my makeup off and redoing my makeup, and even if I use the same palette, that would count as 2 different times. So that's where we're at. And similarly, today actually I did that. So I used a palette. I will tell you guys which one it is when we get to it. And then I used it again to create this look to film in. So that counted as 2. I just kind of want to put that up front. So throughout the year of 2022, there were actually 75 days that I either did not wear makeup at all or I didn't wear eyeshadow. Most of those were actually days that I didn't wear makeup at all, but there are probably about maybe 15 to 20 days where I just didn't wear eyeshadow, but I would say the majority of the 75 was days that I did not wear makeup. So if that number can tell you anything about how my relationship with makeup has been this year, I just haven't really worn makeup quite as much as I did last year. I think last year, the days that I had for that were like less than half of that, or about half of that. I need to look back on that one, but I will have that video linked down below if you want to see how last year compared to this year in the ranking. But other than that, the only other thing that I wanted to share is my singles. Last year I counted them as a palette, but I felt like that gave it kind of an unfair advantage because it placed pretty high. But a lot of times I'm just using like a couple shades from my single collection and kind of mixing them in with a palette, so they kind of end up counting as more than they normally would. So my single shadows consist of a mixture of these 2 palettes. I kind of play around with how they're all like mixed together, but I typically just count them as a palette in my collection. And then I also have some singles that are in individual sort of packaging, but in all, I just kind of totaled up how many times I used any singles to create a look or to like top a look with. If I used it enough to like count it in a look, then I counted it. So throughout the year, I used my singles 21 times. Just one quick last thing I wanted to mention is that some of these palettes that I've only used a few times, or even some of the ones I've used a lot, I might have actually dipped into them more. The only thing I don't really count as using a palette is like something like at the end of the day, if I'm just like throwing a shimmer over the lid or like swatching it or just kind of not really creating a look, but just like throwing it on just to like see the shade or something. I don't count that, but I kind of do that a lot with some of my favorite palettes that I don't use as much, and I'll try and kind of point those out throughout the video. We're going to start with the palettes I use the least and then work our way up to my most used palette. So in spot number 17, we just have the one palette, and it is the I Heart Revolution Mini Tasty Avocado palette. This is one of those palettes I was talking about where sometimes I just like throw the shades on, but I don't really create a look. However, I only technically used this palette to create a look twice this year. Even though I've only used it twice, I still really love this palette. It's just the color story that makes me not reach for it so much because I don't typically wear such bold green shades, but this palette is so beautiful, and it honestly makes me want to try one of their more like neutral tone sort of a palette in this kind of a style. They've got like a peach toned one that I have considered a lot. I love the packaging. I actually really do like this palette, so I don't want it to seem like I don't like it just because I've only used it twice, but it is kind of crazy that I've only used it 2 times in the whole year, but I plan to keep this around. I really do enjoy it. In spot number 16, we have 5 palettes tied. These are all the palettes that I used 3 times this year, so I do have 3 palettes in here that I no longer own. I recently just decluttered the Nomad Tokyo palette. Again, this is one of those palettes where I only technically created 3 like full looks with the palette that I was wearing out or whatever, but there were several times where I would like play with the palette and kind of like try one look on one eye and one look on the other eye. So I do feel like I gave it a fair shot to try and understand the formula, but as I shared in my declutter video, it just really didn't work out for me. So I did declutter that one. And then I also decluttered the two of the 3 Essence palettes that are in this slot. So I also used the Essence Bronze and the Essence Dancing Green palettes 3 times this year. I did decide to declutter them because I just felt like I didn't use them enough to justify keeping them in my collection. There is one other Essence palette that I used 3 times this year. This is the Essence Coral Me Maybe palette. I actually really like this one. I'm surprised I didn't use it more, but I feel like I kind of took a turn to like more warm tone shades after the summertime, and I feel like this is kind of something I want to use in the summer. So I'm hoping that next summer I will enjoy these kinds of tones. I'm hoping that next summer I will enjoy this sort of a palette and these kind of tones more, but I'm definitely planning on keeping this in my collection. I've been so much more into warm tones lately, and I really want to use this more. The last palette in spot number 16 that I used 3 times is the REM Midnight Snack palette. I go back and forth about this palette. Sometimes I feel like I can honestly declutter it, but then when I really look at it, and especially when I swatch it, I just don't want to declutter it. I'm not gonna swatch it in this video because I don't want the video to be too long. That's not really what this video is about. But when I swatch this, I honestly really love the shades. I really love this shade here. And I also like the 2 lighter matte shades, so that for some reason makes it really hard for me to declutter. I also really appreciate this type of a blue shimmer shade and even this black shimmer shade. I just think the whole palette is really pretty. I just wish I used it more, and I think it's just a combination of kind of the packaging doesn't really draw me in. The longer I have it, the less I like it, I guess. I don't know. I feel like if I had to declutter a palette or a few palettes, this would be like one of the first ones to go, to be honest with you. In spot number 15, we have the palette that I used 5 times this year, and this is the Nomad Province palette. So I've kind of struggled with this one a little bit because the color story to me is not like, oops, just dipped my finger into that. But the color story to me is just not, cohesive is not the word, but it's not obvious to me like what look to create. So I do enjoy using this palette, but again, this one is just like it's not my tip-top favorite. I think when I saw this one, I was so excited because, well, first of all, I love the packaging and I think it's so cute. I really like this. But I think when I saw it, because I love some of their other palettes, which you'll see me talk about so much, I thought, oh, okay, this is like a more muted, colorful color story. And so I thought I would like it more, but I just don't find it easy to use and easy to create a look for me. I think I need to give it more of a shot because, like I said, I have only used this 5 times, but I don't know. I keep telling them, like, I want you to come out with a neutral palette. And this was like, in a way, getting closer to neutral because it is more like muted. There are more some like pastel type shades, but they're not like super vibrant like the Iceland palette or something. So, you know, it is more wearable in comparison, but I think you'll see as we get farther along and farther up in the rankings that I was really into neutral palettes. We've got some more colorful palettes in spot number 14. These are the palettes that I used 6 times. The first one is the Deuce by Juvia's Place. This one I honestly really love, and every time I look at it, I get so excited by it, but I think it's just kind of overwhelming all of the palettes that I own. I need to slow down on bringing palettes in my collection. That is one of my goals for the new year, but I love this one. I mean, every shade in here I love so much. I finally hit pan in a Juvia's Place powder shadow, which is just unheard of for me. These pans are freaking massive, so I was so excited that I hit pan in this one, even though it's just like a little baby pan, but I really love this palette. I just honestly, every time I look at it, I'm so excited by it. So I really just need to use it more. But I did use it 6 times this year. These rankings are making me realize like how quick this year flew by because I feel like I've used it so much more than I have, but I haven't. Okay, the next palette that I used 6 times is also from Juvia's Place. This is the Magic Mini palette. I really like this palette. I love the shimmer shades in here, but I just don't find it to be a really easy like go-to palette to create a full look with. I find myself wanting to dip into another palette and then I end up not reaching back into this palette to like complete the look because the matte shades in here are just like not not the ones I would go for. I kind of wish I could move out some of these matte shades and put them in with like my staple mattes, because I just have like a go-to look, and then I forget to dip into this for the shimmer shade, because I typically create a look just from one palette. Not always, but most of the time I do. So this is one, again, that I used 6 times in spot number 14. In spot number 13, we do have another tie. These are 2 palettes that I used 7 times each. The first one is the Profusion Ethereal palette. This is a really great palette. This is a $10 palette. I have a whole review video on this and the other one that launched in the Super Bloom collection, but I didn't realize how similar this one is to Mercury Retrograde from Huda Beauty, which you guys know I love that palette. So I feel like I just don't reach for it as much, because if I want those tones, I'm gonna reach for the Huda palette. I've mentioned it before, but I kind of keep this around because I love this shade right here so much, called Fluorescence. I know I said I wasn't going to swatch anything, but I have to show you guys this shade. I mean, I think it's just stunning. I love it so much. And I just don't want to get rid of this palette because I like that shade. And for $10 to keep one shade, I don't even mind that, because I have some eyeshadow singles that cost $10. So I'm just going to hold on to this for a while. I don't want to get rid of it. But I did use that 7 times. And then the other palette I used 7 times, which again, I'm surprised I didn't use this one more. I think you guys are just going to see like where my ranking is at when we get a little higher up there, like the shades and colors I was using. But the other palette that I used 7 times is the Nomad America's Parks palette. You guys know this is one of my all-time favorite palettes, and if this were a ranking based on how much I like my palettes, this would probably be a good bit higher than spot number 13. But this whole video is about how many times I actually use the palettes. So that's where it's at. It's in spot number 13, and I used it 7 times this year, but don't be fooled. I still love this palette. I just haven't been as into colors lately. Spot number 12, which is a tie of 4 palettes that I used 8 times. The first one is, well, I'll just say it. The first one is my least favorite. I don't really like this palette, you guys. I don't know why. This is the Warrior by Juvia's This is the Warrior palette by Juvia's Place. And I've used this so many times because I was trying to figure out if I liked it or not. And I don't know what it is about this palette that doesn't draw me in, but it's so weird because I've been so much more into neutral and warm tone shades, which is literally what this palette is. But I find something about this a little bit lackluster, which is so weird. Like when I really look at it, I honestly really like it. And when I wear it, I like it. But I think what happened is just because when I first used this, when I first got this and I used it several times, it creased so badly on the lids, and I can't get that out of my head. Like, I think that was the eye primer. It wasn't even the shadow, but I cannot get that out of my head. And so I keep not reaching for this one and kind of putting it on the back burner. So I don't know. I need to use it more, I know. But yeah, this one I used 8 times. The next one I use 8 times is the Nomad Iceland palette. So I'm actually surprised that this one ranked higher than the America's Parks palette, because look how colorful this is. But I was reaching into this a lot for lighter shades. I used this for a couple videos this year, so I think that helped me reach for it more. Hopefully I don't drop it here. But yeah, I really love this palette. This one and the America's Parks palette were the first 2 I had from Nomad. They made me really fall in love with the brand. I love them. These are the quality that I was wanting out of the Tokyo palette, and I just didn't quite get it. But on that note, another palette from Nomad that I freaking love. This one is the Cartagena palette. This is beautiful. I also used this one 8 times, and it tied with the Iceland palette as well. This one I got this summer, and oh my gosh, I almost didn't get this, and I'm so stinking glad that I did. I ordered this in an order with the Province and the Tokyo palette from Nomad, but this was the standout one for me, even though this is the one that I almost took out of my cart. I can't tell you how excited I am to have this in my collection. I reached into this to reach for these lighter shades especially, and then these kind of shimmer shades. I wore this to work, and that is crazy to me. Like, this is such a bright palette, but I felt like I was able to actually utilize some of the lighter shades, and the formula is so stinking good. Okay, I'm gonna break my rule one more time. I'm just gonna swatch these 3 light matte shades here. They're so buttery, so creamy, and they just look amazing. That's the kind of formula that we need neutral palettes in. So I'm just waiting for Nomad to come out with like a boring, basic neutral palette, because it won't be boring and basic because their formula is amazing. So this one, I love. I cannot wait to use this more. I've only had this half the year, so you have to kind of remember that in this ranking. If I got it later in the year, I had less of a chance to use it. So this being, you know, tied with some of my other ones, I feel like it's actually pretty good. So that one's also in spot number 12. And then the last one at spot number 12 is my newest palette to my collection. This is a Lethal Cosmetics custom palette that I made. I shared this in my what I got for Christmas video. I will link that for you guys. I want to do a whole video on this, so, you know, I know I'm not sharing like every single shade that I got and all that stuff, but it's just because it would be a lot more time consuming, and I really want to share that video with you guys and like really walk you through the palette. Let me know if that's something that you guys want to see, because I do plan on filming that. This is the palette that I have on right now. So as I'm filming this today, it is December 29th, and I'm saying that I've used this 8 times, which isn't technically possible right now because I did not open this until Christmas Day. But since Christmas Day, I have planned to use this from Christmas Day until New Year's Eve, so I would have used it for 7 days. I created 2 looks with it on Monday, so that would have been 8 looks. And then I'm pretty sure I'm not actually going to end up wearing makeup on Christmas Eve. So if that's the case, I also created a second look today. So it might actually be 9 uses, but at a minimum it will be 8, because this is the palette I'm going to use for the rest of the week. So it will be 8 by the end of the year. So that's it for spot number 12. So in spot number 11 are the palettes that I've used 9 times. So the first one is the Natasha Denona Ayana palette. This one I got in a giveaway on Instagram. I think it was last year that I won this. And I really like this one. I feel like it's just a really good like staple palette. It's a nice one to reach for. And yeah, I really like it. I mean, I think these retail for like $50, and I definitely could not recommend that. At that point, you might as well just get one of the, you know, a little bit larger palettes, or even get one of the mini ones. I don't think I would suggest paying full price for this, but I know they have these on sale a lot. So I would suggest it for that, or if you have BoxyCharm, I think they sometimes put these in like their sale section or something. I don't have BoxyCharm anymore, so I don't really know, but I've heard people say that. So I do like it, and I'm glad it's in my collection, but if I lost it, I would not purchase it. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, the next one I have fallen in love with. I can't believe I've only used this 9 times. This is another one where I sometimes just like sit down at my vanity before I know I'm about to take a shower, like throw these shimmer shades over the lid, over whatever else I already have on, and then I go wash my face. Like that's how it goes. I do that all the time. If you guys can relate, let me know. Like, am I the only one that does that? I don't know. Sometimes if I like have all these shimmers over my eyes, I will even just start swatching like on my cheeks with random shimmer shades. But nonetheless, this is the BH Cosmetics and Iggy Azalea Totally Plastic palette. This is the pink sunglasses version. It's the pink one. And I love this thing. I love it so much. You know what? I'm going to put a clip in right here of where I wore this the other day. I just wore it, I think it was last week, and I just loved it. I love it so much. Love the packaging of this. It's so cute. I cannot wait to use this more, but so far I have used it 9 times. And again, I got that one over the summer, I believe. Next up for spot number 11 is the Profusion Harvest palette. Again, I'm kind of surprised I haven't used this one more than 9 times. It's honestly sort of mind-blowing to me, but I will say, I think you're gonna see that I've kind of used my palettes, like my favorites, almost evenly. I feel like I'm jumping around a lot, which just means like all of my palettes are my favorite, which I think again is a good problem to have. But this is the other palette from Profusion, the Super Bloom collection. This retails for $10, which I just think is insane. I have to say that when I talk about this palette because it blows my mind. Like, it's so good. I love this palette. I don't know what else to say about it. It's amazing. It's so affordable. I don't have anything bad to say about it. I really like this one. And again, I need to use it more. It's such a good one. The last palette in spot number 11 that I used 9 times is one of my favorites. Again, this is the Give Me Glow Pastel Dreams palette. This is another one of those where I will just throw the shimmer shades on just for the heck of it. I cannot believe I've only used this 9 times this year. I just have not been into colorful shades lately. Well, for the most of the year, but I still love this palette, especially my favorite, this one, Lavender Sky. You guys can probably see the dip in it. It is just my favorite of all time. I love it so much. Really need to use this some more. Such a good one. All right, in spot number 10, these are the palettes I've used 11 times. The first one is the ColourPop Making Mauves palette. I've talked about this one a lot, especially in the springtime. This is one of my favorites. I really love the tones of this. I love the shimmer shades. This is such a good one. I have switched this shade out. This is actually the Cocoa Crush shade from the Going Coconuts palette, but overall, I just love this one. It's just one of my favorites. I've used it 11 times. I'm kind of surprised this next one is higher on the list. I've used it 11 times, which I know isn't a lot, but considering I didn't wear eyeshadow 75 days of the year, I mean, to use something 11 times is still pretty high. But this is the Persona Identity 1 palette. I feel like I haven't really loved this one as much as I did last year, and it's just because the matte shades are just so deep. They take extra work to blend out. As much as I love the shimmer shades, I just find that I don't reach for this one quite as much because I have found better neutral palettes this year, which you guys will see very shortly. But nonetheless, I did use this one 11 times. I still really like it. I love the shimmer shades. So, you know, I don't plan on getting rid of it or anything. Like these 4 here, love them for the lid. And this is my favorite inner corner highlight shade ever. Sometimes I will just reach into that palette for the inner corner. I don't typically put this on my usage if I only use it for the inner corner. But you know what? Maybe I should, because that's sometimes a very crucial part of an eye look. So I don't know, maybe next year I need to include that when I use that shade. And then the last palette tied for spot number 10 is the Natasha Denona My Dream palette. This one is new to me. I got this in the fall of this year. This was sent to me in PR, but I love this palette. I have just like fallen head over heels for this palette. I think it's so beautiful. I don't know that I would have picked it up, honestly, if it hadn't been sent to me. So I'm really grateful that it was, because it's become a real favorite of mine. To have used it 11 times in the last just couple months, I think is pretty good. And yeah, I mean, even just looking at this, I'm like, wow, I just want to wash my makeup off and create a look with this one. So this has just been such a favorite. I really am glad that I own this one. So that's the last one for spot number 10. So now we're kind of jumping up to my favorites. I think you guys are going to start to see a good jump. So the last several palettes I used 11 times, but this next one I used 16 times. So we're kind of jumping up to the ones that I could not stop reaching for. And I think you're going to see a trend. So in spot number 9, I used this palette 16 times. And I'm honestly surprised because I won this in a giveaway from the brand. For me, I don't know, maybe this is just me, but in the past, if I find makeup that is on mega sale or clearance, or I buy it as an impulse purchase, or I win it in a giveaway, or I didn't come across it in a way where I just like longed to have it and really, really wanted it, fell in love with it, and then went and bought it, I don't reach for it as much. I find that I'm drawn to palettes that I've like really wanted for more often, but I would say this is an exception. And also the Iggy Azalea and BH Cosmetics palette is an exception because I just kind of thought that one was pretty in TJ Maxx and I bought it and then I fell in love with it. But this one even more so because I just feel like sometimes if I come across a palette, like I said, that I kind of didn't come across like I normally would, then I don't like it as much. But this one has blown me away. This has been such a great one. I love this one so much. This is their Chasing Eternity palette. They have a couple other neutral options, but this is the one that I chose. The quality on this blows me away. This is a $17 palette, and it seriously performs pretty close to Natasha Denona quality. I mean, I'm not even kidding. It's so good. Okay, next up is the palette that I use 17 times in spot number 8. This is the ColourPop That's Taupe palette. Another really great ColourPop palette. This one ranked very high in my list last year, I believe. I think I might be thinking about my year, like my mid-year check-in. I don't know, but I've used this one a ton. I really love it. It doesn't even look like I've barely ever used it, but I have. I just think that the shades don't really show wear as much as some others, but I really like this one. I feel like I used to talk about this a lot. I've just been more into warm tones lately, so that's probably why you haven't heard me talk about it quite as much lately, because it is more cool tone, but still a great palette. Next up in spot number 7 is the palette that I used 18 times. This is the Kathleen Lights and Il Makiage Disco Fox palette. That's like a lot of words there. I really do like this palette, but it irritates the heck out of me now every time I use it, because it would be so nice to be able to use this little handle on the palette as you're like holding it and then creating your look, but I'm left-handed, so I have to hold it on this little bitty side and then create this look like this, and it just irritates me. I know that doesn't really matter, but this is a very, very expensive palette. And if I'm being honest, I genuinely believe they should have offered 2 versions of this palette, one with this on this side and one with it on the other side, because it's just honestly annoying. Like, I know I'm not the only left-handed person in the world. How nice would this be if you could just hold it on the other side? I don't know. I do really like this though, and it did rank number 7. So I don't know, because I'm kind of mad at it, I don't want to talk about it anymore. In spot number 6, this is the palette I've used 19 times this year. This is the Natasha Denona Glam palette. I don't care that it's cool tone. Even though I've been into warm tones, I will always reach for this palette. This and the My Dream palette just totally justify the price of Natasha Denona palettes for me. If I know I got the My Dream palette in PR, but if I were to lose that, I would repurchase it. Same thing goes for this one. I did purchase this one with my own money though, but it's just so good. I mean, I love this one. I've talked about this so many times. This, spoiler alert, was my #1 palette last year. It's so good. I mean, I was way more into cool tones last year, so that kind of explains why it's been knocked down to #6, but it was my most used palette last year. Okay, #5. I honestly feel like you guys might be surprised about this one because this is a newer palette to me as well. I got this one over the summer. This is also a BH palette. This is the BH Cosmetics Hanging in Hawaii palette. Such a good palette. I have talked about this one a lot for good reason, because this palette, it doesn't matter if you have an eyeshadow primer on or not, even if you have set your eyelids or put concealer on them at all, this palette will not crease. You can wear this for like 18 hours and it will not crease. It will not crease. And I do struggle with creasing. I'm sure someone out there has more oily eyelids than I do, but I do have hooded eyes. They do get a little bit oily. They do kind of break apart and crease a lot. Every other palette really will do that, but this one will not. I don't know I don't know what's different about this one. It just does not crease on me, and I think that that's amazing. But on top of that, these shades are just beautiful. So yeah, I mean, these shimmers right here are high-end shimmers. These look so incredible. Honestly, these look better than a lot of my high-end ones. So just such a good one. I cannot recommend this enough. It's like $7 if you can find it at TJ Maxx. And even if it's full price, I think it's only about $15 or $16. This is a standout palette for me. And again, this would probably be higher than #5 on my ranking, but it might be around #5. It definitely would not be lower. This is a top 5 in my collection. Okay, in spot #4, I am very surprised about this one, but I think there's a good explanation. I have been so into like simple makeup and simple eyeshadow and quick eyeshadow, but in #4 is the palette I used 27 times, and it is the Charlotte Tilbury Pillow Talk Eyeshadow Quad. The specific reason why this is so high is because I was so determined to hit pan in this shade right here. And do you see that I finally hit pan in it? I was so excited when that happened, you guys. These pans are like pretty deep, so the fact that I finally hit pan in that just makes me very happy. And yeah, that's why this one is so high on the list. Honestly, I do really like this palette, but I would not be ranking it #4 out of all my palettes. I think I kind of overlooked this one because out of the 4 shades, this one just gets hard pan on it. It doesn't really it looks pretty on my finger, I feel like, as a swatch, but on the eyes, it just, to me, feels like nothing. So if 25% of the palette is nothing to me, I just kind of overlook a palette, I guess. I don't know. So I don't really think about that one as #4, but it ranked #4 in the actual amount of times I've used it. Okay, spots #3, 2, and 1 is Totally Suede. And I'm kind of considering what to do about that for next year because I love this video so much and to see how much I actually use things. But if you guys remembered, I had a project on my channel for the first half of 2022 called Project Huda Beauty. And if you haven't noticed, I haven't talked about any Huda palettes in my collection yet. So that being said, in spot #3 is the Huda Nude Light palette. I used this palette 32 times throughout the year. So I finally hit pan in every single shade in this palette. Because of that project, I was trying to just use the palettes as much as possible and hit as many pans as possible from actual usage. I don't do really the tunnel pan type thing where you just target one little spot. You can see all of mine have true dips of usage in them. The only thing is darker shades for me end up kind of being a tunnel a little bit more. Still not though. I hope you can tell there is a dip in it. But I typically use smaller brushes in deeper shades because I'm mostly only putting them on the outer corner. So I did finally hit pan in every shade in this palette, which is a first for me ever. Even though it only has 9 shades, that was a really big accomplishment for me. But I did get burnt out on this palette just because of how many times I used it in the first half of the year. And I think that makes sense. But next up in spot #2 is the Huda Mercury Retrograde palette. So actually, I think I need to pull out my other one. Because we're talking about the palettes that I actually used this year, I want to pull out the one that I've retired so that we can actually look at the usage of this palette. I mean, oh my goodness. The one thing I'll say is I've been burnt out on this palette because I've used it 40 times this year. So, you know, I haven't really reached for it much in the second half of the year. But if you guys didn't know, I did actually replace it with a new one. These went on sale at the end of last year, like in December. So I did pick up another one. And then in my birthday month of July, I finally retired my old one and updated it. But I will say, I love the look of the old one. Like, this just looks so much more appealing to me than the new one. I just like to see a loved palette, honestly. But I hope to kind of like re-love the palette again, you know what I mean? Like re-fall in love with it because I love this one. I have used the heck out of it. This is one of those palettes that when I first saw it launched, was that like 2019? I wanted it so badly, but it was $67 and I just did not have $67 to just buy a palette like willy-nilly. And so I waited months and months and months. And then when I graduated college, this is the palette that I bought for myself as a celebration for that achievement. So this just means a lot to me. Like, it unpacks more than just a palette to me. And I love it for that too. Like, every time I think about it or every time I see it, I think about kind of like why I got it and when, and I love it so much. So I was able to use this in my project Huda Beauty as well and hit a ton of new pans. So yeah, I need to pick this one back up, or actually this one back up, and continue using it because it's a really, really beautiful palette. I love this one. So that one's at number 2, which leaves us with the number 1 palette of 2022 for me. Again, I think it makes sense because out of the 3 Huda palettes that I have, this is the most neutral option. So I used this palette 41 times. This is the Huda New Nude palette. Again, I love Huda palettes. This one's so good. But it was also in the Project Huda Beauty palette. Had it not been, I don't think it would have placed number 1. I'm just being honest. But that's kind of something that I'm thinking about for next year. You guys are gonna have to let me know, like, what do you think about that? Because it's definitely skewed the results. I mean, Project Huda Beauty was 6 months of the year, and they're the top 3 palettes of my collection. There's a pretty significant jump from the Huda palettes down to anything else in my collection. So it's just something to think about. But yeah, I really love this palette. These 2 shimmer shades right here will forever be some of my favorites in my entire collection. I think it's so good. However, looking at all of my palettes, I'm being honest, this would not be my number 1. I don't know what would, honestly. I really don't. Haven't thought about it. But the Huda New Nude palette is the number 1 palette of my actual usage of palettes for 2022. You'll have to let me know if you guys are surprised to see what the number 1 palette was. Also, let me know if you want to see a ranking video from me where I rank them based on just like what I'm liking. I could definitely post that in January for you guys if you're more interested to see kind of how I'm actually feeling about the palettes. Those would obviously not include the ones I don't own anymore. They would just be the ones that I have, and I think that'd be a lot of fun. Again, I think we're going to see a lot of our neutrals reflected in the top portion of the ranking. So let me know down below any video ideas or requests that you want to see from me in the new year, especially any series that you want to see on my channel. I'd love to know that because it'd be something for us to look forward to for the rest of 2023. But thank you guys so much for watching today's ranking style video based on how many times I actually use my palettes. I'm excited to keep you guys posted on this. I plan to do another like mid-year check-in in the beginning of July to let you guys know how the first half of the year is going. But with that being said, that's going to be it for me today. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.